What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media. Today, we're talking wide receivers. The draft is oh so close, so it's time to really put the microscope down on some of these prospects, find out who the best fits are for the Patriots throughout the draft, because wouldn't be surprised to see them double dip considering what the depth chart currently looks like. And to help break down some of those fits, I have somebody who has done a phenomenal job breaking down these prospects on the Underdog YouTube channel, on the Underdog website. One of the few people I've seen who did a pro comparison with multiple players for each prospect. Just the attention to detail is beyond fantastic. So, Hayden, Winks, welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We always check in with Patriot stuff. Obviously, this offseason, they're picking up the top of the draft board. And Josh and I, whenever we're doing our videos, and same thing with my boss, we're checking in with you. That's the Patriot source that we like. No one knows the team better than you do. So
appreciate you, buddy. All right, so before we actually get into the prospects, let's get your thoughts on the actual Patriots and what their team looks like. So I know you were doing your research earlier today, so I kind of know the answer to this question. But for those who don't know, based on who the Patriots have right now, so we're looking at a depth chart that's got Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, and KJ Osborne likely as the top receivers, at least for right now. And behind them, technically Juju Smith-Schuster. Don't know how long he's going to be on the team, but, give him a little asterisk. And then you got Tyquan Thornton, who, he's getting pretty rocked up this offseason. I will give him that. That's kind of exciting, but at the same time, the route running inconsistency and the hand inconsistency, you don't know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. Then Jalen Reagor came on a little bit towards the end of last season, but he's kind of at that point in his career where you really know what he is. He's more of a returner. If he can give you something on offense, that's nice, but not somebody you want to rely on. So based on who they do have on the roster right now, what do you think in terms of role is the biggest need at wide receiver for this team?
So there's just a lack of talent. Obviously, everyone knows that, but there's also just not a lot of diversity in the type of wide receivers that they have. Kendrick Bourne, KJ Osborne, Pop Douglas, Juju Smith-Schuster, those guys are all like 190 to 210 in their weight, and they're kind of balancing between 30 and 60%, 70% in the slot. And then Tyquan Thornton, he plays on the outside, but he was listed at 185. Let's pretend he's 200 now with the weight gain over there. It's just, there's not an X receiver. They need some size here. And that's the tough part about this, because all the X wide receivers, Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, and then Brian Thomas Jr., they're either being drafted at third overall, or they're going to be completely off the board by the time the Patriots get to the second round. I think that's going to be one of the issues that we're going to have to sort out here, because the round two wide receivers, a lot of them, the Ricky Pearsalls, the Ladd McConkey, the Xavier Worthy types, that kind of guy, that's kind of the build that the Patriots already have on the roster. Every team needs a true X receiver. Really helps out the passing game and the matchups, and kind of puts KJ Osborne and Kendrick Bourne and Pop Douglas into their roles as more like wide receiver threes on the team. So they just need to find that true X wide receiver can win down the field a little bit. So I think they're going to have to take some darts, like in the round 3 is kind of my projection right now.
I'm curious what you think, considering Pop Douglas had a couple concussions that we knew about. I think he might have had a third that wasn't reported. That's purely speculation. But clearly, if you have 2 concussions in one season, that's a problem. So he's kind of the only guy they have with anything close to dynamic speed. And then you talk about a guy like Xavier Worthy, where, he's small. He may kind of fit into that same bubble where he may be a slot only, put him at Z, but as long as it's a stack or a bunch where he can be protected. Do you think it's still worth investing in some kind of Demario Douglas insurance just in case he ends up being somebody that you can't really rely on? One, probably not over the middle of the field. You want to make sure he's avoiding those bigger hits, but also just in case something happens and he ends up missing time.
So I think that Kendrick Bourne and KJ Osborne and Juju Smith-Schuster, that kind of trio of receivers, can just throw them into the slot for the time being. I think that getting tied up, I love Ladd McConkey, for example, and he can play the slot at the next level. I just think that's so much overlap, where I would rather, instead of trying to fit this Z slot receiver type, I'm already going to say one of these 4 guys, 2 of these 4 guys that's already on the roster, you got to just stick him out there for this year, give him in a rotation, make him compete once again. I think that KJ Osborne can certainly be a slot receiver for the team if Pop Douglas got hurt. And I think I would rather either draft Marvin Harrison, trade down and be in the mix if the Vikings come out with some crazy offer. Now you're sitting at pick 11 where you can go up to get Rome Odunze. You can sit there and take Brian Thomas. I think that type of skill set is exactly what Patriots are missing here, just like to put some numbers behind this. Last year, Devontae Parker, he led the Patriots in isolated routes. He's out there basically as the X receiver with 125. He was fine. 1.9 yards per route run is like nothing to get super excited about, but that's like respectable starting production. Next closest on the Patriots was Jalen Reagor. He had 66 routes. He had 5 yards. 5 yards. And now it's like maybe he's the guy that's in that role currently, but that's not good enough. So somebody that historically back to college has the size profile, the vertical speed, and then also just the experience winning from that spot. And there's a couple guys that aren't in round one that at least fit that mold. And maybe if you get lucky, you can find someone like Terry McLaurin, something like that.
I agree, especially with this Alex Van Pelt offense. Like we've seen what Amari Cooper was able to do, where when you go through their explosive plays from last season, even outside of Cooper, it was a lot of just win down the sideline, a lot of those ISO targets where it's 3-by-1. Like, we don't really care who's lined up against you. We're going to trust you to win. They don't really have that guy. Even if you want to, say, okay, you get like a McVay and that kind of tree where it's a lot of condensed formations, it's still really hard to live in that world unless you have dynamic guys who can win inside the numbers. And even still, they don't have that. So it's not a quarterback show, but I will ask you, with Jaden Daniels, Drake May, maybe even J.J. McCarthy, looking like the guys the Patriots are most likely to target early on in the draft, how does the prototype of the receiver you think they might need to target, or does it change at all depending on who they end up taking?
I don't think so, just because what the Patriots kind of back themselves into with just their current depth chart. It's just the overlap of the skill sets, where I just think it's just this certain type of player is what they need, regardless of who the quarterback's going to be. If you really want to nitpick this, I think that Drake May and Jaden Daniels, those two guys were probably a little bit more prone to throwing the ball to the sideline 20 to 40 yards downfield, sometimes from the slot fades, but you still got to get that arm strength over there. Where J.J. McCarthy, he was more of the Shanahan type of tree where you're going to throw the ball over the middle, where you need somebody that could sink their hips a little bit more, break on the inside, dig routes, those type of routes. Maybe a little bit more from J.J. McCarthy, but at this point, the Patriots, I don't think they can get too choosy with this. I just think they need somebody that can, in the red zone, throw up a fade potentially. If it's 3rd and 10, who's going to win on the post route out there, on a slant perhaps. You got to get all of those type of routes accounted for. So I don't think that it really matters if it's Drake May or Jaden Daniels or perhaps J.J. McCarthy. I think like at this point, you're just basically starting from scratch. I don't think that any of the receivers on the roster are going to be like difference makers in 2, 3, 4 years from now when the Patriots like hypothetically would be back in like the playoff picture.
Patriots and the beggars can't be choosers category. It's completely fair. All right, now let's dive into the actual prospects, starting in round 1. Now, I am of the opinion that taking a wide receiver with the number 3 pick would be irresponsible when you have a need both at quarterback and at left tackle. I absolutely think that they do need that alpha kind of, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors isn't really that X type, but, that ball winner who can win outside the numbers. But you got to start somewhere and then maybe go get that guy later on in the draft. But if they end up trading back, like you said, maybe a Brian Thomas, maybe you get somebody in the late first round, that's still on the table. So in the first round, who are some guys you think would be good fits for what the Patriots currently need?
Well, if they trade down, it's most likely going to be with the Vikings, because I think the Vikings probably love Drake May. So if they throw 3 first-round picks out there and Elliott Wolf is a little bit kind of in limbo here and he wants to take and kind of build for the future here, I think the 11th overall is right outside the striking distance for Rome Odunze, where they can go take the draft capital they just got, go up and take Rome Odunze, who is like the perfect archetype of the receiver that we're talking to. If they stick at 11, then I do think that that's probably the top of where I would be comfortable with Brian Thomas. I have a mid-round grade with him. Brian Thomas, it was basically go balls, hitch routes, and that was basically it. But he was so good on those routes, and those routes are very tough to kind of find. And he's also, 6'3", 209 with 4.3 speed. He averaged 30 yards per target when on these deep targets, 20 plus yards downfield. I mean, that is exceptional stuff there. And then if let's say they get the 23rd overall pick in that trade down, I think that's the range where some people really like A.D. Mitchell. And he is that vertical X receiver. He was just so inconsistent to me, where I have an early round 2 grade on him. So he could potentially be there at that 34th overall if he slips a little bit. But I think that's kind of the big names that are going to go the top 40 that kind of fit this X receiver mold. But I have Brian Thomas definitely a tier ahead of AD Mitchell, just because AD Mitchell, while he has the explosiveness, there's just a lack of consistency in his game that I've been trying to wrap my head around, because he has like no yards after the catch ability, despite being a 4.35 guy. I don't know what to make of it. I would love to like sit down and interview him.
Yeah, I was really digging into him this morning because like I've seen the highlights. I just wanted to taste of that because I heard about the inconsistencies. So sometimes I just want to be like, all right, let me start on a high for this guy. Like, get me excited before I get into the stuff that's going to frustrate me. Then when I got to the tape, I'm like, I've heard that sometimes he kind of takes plays off when he's on the backside. I'm like, no, I've seen him get the ball thrown his way. Yeah. And it seems like there's times where I know he said, I saw in your guys' episode where he cut to the clip where he's at the combine saying, yeah, I never really run full speed. And, you know, yeah, some guys can use that to their advantage when you change up pace. And I understand that. But at the same time, there's other occasions where I'm like, no, I see you put your head down, up your arms. And that's where I'm like, this guy's scary. That's the kind of thing you'd like to see more often. And it's not just even as a route runner. It's also as a run blocker where I'm like, okay, this isn't just like you changing up pace. It's just I don't really know when you're on and when you're off. So from your perspective, for a team like the Patriots, where especially like I feel like intangibles are going to be really big with them, and that effort and that, you know, maybe leadership even, where you are trying to build the foundation for a new offense where these are going to be your star playmakers. Do you feel comfortable investing in AD again at the end of that first round, or do you think they are safer possibly waiting to see if he slips to the second, and then you say, all right, this guy's talented. Maybe we can coach up the effort a little bit, show him what the standard is for us, but he's too talented to pass on.
So I think it depends on what draft pick we're talking about. If let's say the Vikings trade up and now there's the Patriots sitting at 23, I think 23 is a perfect spot to find a tackle. And I would rate most of the tackles ahead of AD Mitchell. Now, if we're talking about their current early second round pick, I do think despite there being some inconsistencies, and there's definitely a floor that makes me a little bit nervous here, I think the upside is worth chasing at that point. I think most of the left tackle prospects are going to go there. For example, like the BYU left tackle might be the best one on the table, and he's a very much work in progress. I know grades are very up and down with him as well. So I think at that point I would be comfortable with AD Mitchell. But it's tough because I have like a higher grade on Ladd McConkey. I think that Ladd McConkey should be available where the Patriots go. He's just the slot Z receiver that they already have. I think he's going to be good. So maybe it is worth like investing in Ladd McConkey and just realizing that this is a team in development and that next year maybe they can find the X receiver. So I think that'd be kind of a tough debate between like Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, and Ladd McConkey. It's like Mitchell is the best for this role, but I think that I like Worthy and Ladd McConkey more.
And speaking of McConkey, because we're going to transition into round two, so kind of use him because I've got him right between round one and round two.
Yes.
Now, usually that's like boom or bust. I don't think he's boom or bust, but the size does scare me. Like, I think the speed and the explosiveness are there. The route running is there. He's going to be a good pro. But when you talk about like a first round investment, even towards the end, I'm thinking, especially like it's not a significant injury history, but the injuries themselves were significant. So where do you have him? Do you think that he's worthy of being taken in the first round if there ends up being some kind of run on wide receivers? Or do you think he's likely going to go more really early on day two?
I have a late round one grade on him. I have him as my wide receiver 5, like between Brian Thomas, I have like a tier above. And then it's like Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey. I feel very similar between those two. Then it gets into your AD Mitchell. I'm with you. I don't think Ladd McConkey's boom bust unless the injuries just really pop up, which he's an undersized receiver. You don't have to tell the Patriots their history of these undersized receivers battling through injuries all the time. There's people that want to comp Ladd McConkey to Julian Edelman. I see this very similar athletic traits with that, but Ladd McConkey won on the outside a whole lot. If you just look at his like height, weight, speed, and the amount of snaps he played on the outside versus inside, the guys that he actually comps to, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Tyler Lockett, Zay Flowers, those type of wide receivers. Those are like
gym rats in that group.
Yeah, exactly. So he gets pigeonholed in this role. I do think that he would be the outside receiver. You get Pop Douglas in the slot, but then is Kendrick Bourne going to be your X receiver? Maybe that's the plan here. So I think it'd be an interesting debate. I think if the Patriots walked away with Ladd McConkey in the early second round, I would totally get it and just kind of play for the future here.
Yep, I agree. All right, we will move into day 2 and beyond fits, but first, got to pay the bills, so send it over to our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I personally love Prize Picks because they're super easy to use, easy to navigate, and they offer injury insurance, so your entries stay live even if one of your players gets injured. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, so moving on to some day 2 picks. Now, this is a spot where I feel like the Patriots are more likely to take a receiver. I would understand if they went tackle, but a lot of these day 2 tackles are going to be developmental types, and the receivers are going to be guys that can contribute likely from day 1. So who are some guys that ring a bell for you? Yes, I think these are people that Pat should target in round 2.
So a couple names here, Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman. I think that's going to be the players that are going to be kind of early round 2 if the Patriots kind of stay where they're at. Keon Coleman, I think that because he's so big, people think he's this X receiver. He really never has done that. That was kind of Johnny Wilson, actually. And I think that Keon Coleman, his lack of speed down the field is the reason why he's not a very good separator. And I think that if you put him into the power slot spot, I do think that all of a sudden he becomes a Juju Smith-Schuster type, who I do think can get open, very physical, very confident in his hands. I think that he would be intriguing with that if they're willing to kind of like push Pop Douglas off the field. I would not like Keon Coleman to be the answer at X receiver. I think that's kind of playing him out of position, but I think there's going to be differing opinions with Keon Coleman. I do know that Keon Coleman, he blocks, he's physical. So there's like certainly for a defensive minded coach, I would understand why they would like Keon Coleman. And then Troy Franklin is very similar to Tyquan Thornton. I think that Troy Franklin's much better than Tyquan Thornton as a route runner. Troy Franklin actually was number 2 in this class in yards per game as this isolated wide receiver with 42 of them. So that's interesting. He actually did play on the outside and win vertically. Now he was a little bit slower at the combine, 4.41 than what I saw on tape. I think that he kind of looks like a 4.3 type of player. But he's very skinny. And are the Patriots willing to kind of roll the dice just like how they did with Tyquan Thornton and maybe you trot out Troy Franklin at times as an X receiver? That would certainly make me nervous because of the size transitioning into the NFL. But I think those are two names towards the top that we haven't really got to yet.
They actually reportedly are meeting with Troy Franklin. I didn't expect that at all. I thought he'd be off their board because of the weight. It's like 5th percentile weight. So that surprised me. But at the same time, like you said, he can win outside. You talk about a guy who can tilt coverage with his speed. I think he's more of a really good wide receiver too.
Yes.
Where if you have a dominant X, then it's like, well, they can't really cheat either way because you got the guy who's going to take the top off or the guy who can consistently win one-on-one. Now, with Keon Coleman, it's kind of funny because they both comp to players that Patriots fans have kind of been traumatized by. Like with Troy Franklin, it's Tyquan Thornton, although I agree. I think he's more slippery, which is a big thing where, if you're going to be that undersized guy, at least give some yards after catch. I think he does that. I think he's more deliberate and craftier as a route runner. So I do put him a tier above Tyquan for sure. But with Keon, please explain why he is not N'Keal Harry 2.0. I've tried to do it myself. I don't think I've been convincing enough, and you're much better at this than I am. So please, the floor is yours.
So with Keon Coleman, he's still only 21 years old on draft night. So that's something in his favor. He definitely has the size profile that you're talking about. There are certainly some elite plays at the catch point with him. I think that the difference would be, I think that Keon Coleman, while he didn't do this a lot, I did see him sink his hips and be able to run in-breaking routes and out-breaking routes, which he would run in the slot if they do transition him over there. And I just think that his hands are very consistent, and I think that he plays confident. I think that's why he was so fast in the gauntlet drill. But he's definitely going to be a little bit work in progress. And I think that while I'm trying to rank Keon Coleman, I gave him a round 2 grade. He's my wide receiver 9 in the class, which I think is about at consensus. I think like his landing spot's going to be so dependent on what I'm going to actually project him as, because I don't want him as the X receiver, just because I do think as the X receiver, you need some level of speed, and you just don't get that with Keon Coleman. I do think that in the slot, I think some of these traits that we've seen from these highlight grabs, and there's a little bit of shake and bake to his game. Like I've seen him like hurdle over defenders, for example. I think you can kind of see that over the middle of the field. So like kind of a poor man's Drake London. Now Drake London plays actual X receiver, but they can both bend and they're big players. There's a little bit of Juju. Mohamed Sanu is actually another comp talking about Patriots. So yeah, weirdly enough, I have a bunch of Patriots as comps there. I think that Troy Franklin, I had it as Jamison Williams, Darnell Mooney, Jalen Hyatt, Quentin Johnson, but I do think that Tyquan Thornton would be somewhere in that build. Is the difference with Troy Franklin, though, real quick. 92nd percentile age-adjusted production, 3.3 yards per route run, 20 fantasy points per game at Oregon. I mean, those are just absurd numbers. Those are round 1 numbers, especially when you're talking about like a 21-year-old early declare from the Power 5. It's just how much does that translate, and it just goes back to the size. But I don't think he's that dissimilar to Jamison Williams, who went round 1. I think the NFL starting to learn their lesson. If you are going to be tiny, you at least have some wiggle, where Jamison Williams just up and down. Where I do think that someone like Tank Dell or maybe Xavier Worthy, I think they have a little bit more tempo. They can win side to side. That's why like Tyreek Hill obviously is so damn good on top of just being fast. So I think that might be the difference between Troy Franklin might have gone round 1 a couple years ago, but maybe he's more of a round 2 guy now.
How do you feel about Xavier Legette? Because he's been my like round 2 darling. I kind of even tipped over because I know that like Brent and AJ were talking about him maybe at the end of round 1, and I'm like, no, get him in the building. And I was like, all right, that might be a little rich. Maybe I'm getting a little desperate here. But at the same time, when you talk about like size and explosiveness, when you get past the first round, there's not a lot of guys who have both. You got like Troy Franklin, guys like that, where they have all the speed in the world. Keon Coleman, where he's big, he can body guys, and he can be that contested catch guy who goes up and wins. But Legette, I feel like, is the only one where he can walk onto the field from day one. Not an ideal X, but can at least be used in those ISO situations. Also kind of in the Debo role where you put him at Z, get some manufactured touches, and he can make a big impact for you at each level of defense. How do you feel about him?
I think that was the perfect breakdown. Yeah, he was not like the traditional X receiver. He only had 19 yards per game as like the isolated wide receiver at South Carolina. And it took a while for him to break out. He's got this crazy story that everyone should go listen to. Just the fact that he's even around for this is a credit to his characters. I do think that he would fit the locker room and the culture that the Patriots are trying to establish. I'm with you, though. Even though he has X receiver, outside receiver size, 6'1", 221, I kind of like him more in the Debo manufactured touches type of role. Like my comparisons, he's definitely way less agile than Debo Samuel. I think that he kind of gets chopped up. He's super like leggy, not to make that stupid pun.
It's
and
just too easy. It's too easy.
He gets chopped down a little bit too much after the catch, where Debo Samuel just absolutely lights people up and can continue moving forward. Cordell Patterson is also another interesting name with Xavier Legette. I've seen him take kickoffs to the house. That's obviously more valuable with the NFL rule change. So I think if Xavier Legette was there in the 3rd round, which is possible, there's such a deep class, he can be the wide receiver 13 that's taken, and that could be in the early part of the 3rd round.
Oh my God.
I think that'd be kind of the best of both worlds. So you can throw him out there on the outside receiver, but you can also get some explosiveness in the offense. I still think he's a little bit in development here, but crossing routes, dig routes, I've seen him do that stuff. And then I've seen the manufacturer stuff work to like a certain degree. So I'm a fan of him. I wouldn't get too carried away with I wouldn't want him at 34th overall. That would kind of scare me.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I think I have my like draft crushes. I completely acknowledge that he's like maybe higher on him than most people, because like my comp is kind of like, obviously these are tough. Like especially with Debo, like we did it with Treylon Burks. And it's important to remember that, yes, like the comps are just an idea of what their game is like, but like no one is Debo. Debo is Debo, because what he offers is just something you don't find very often or ever. And then as a route runner, I think of like an AJ Brown, where he's kind of stiff and he's not the most fluid guy, but he's physical and he snaps off routes really well, where he can get separation. And I think he can overcome some of his deficiencies. And if he doesn't, he's a great jump ball guy. So he's going to win in that department anyway. Doesn't drop passes. So, all right. So you talked me down a little bit. If he's there in round 3 and they take him after like a tackle in round 2, dude, I'm going to be so unprofessional.
Awesome. Yes,
it's going to be a good time.
I think it's possible because this class is so deep, and every team needs different types of roles here. And I think that's why I'm like trying to obsess. All right, who's the traditional slot receiver? Who's a vertical slot receiver? Who's the next receiver? Who's this kind of Z low volume guy? Because each team needs different things. Like ironically, the Bills and the Patriots need the same type of player. Both the teams, your rival over there. They both need that X receiver. They have tons of slot Z type of players, but they're searching for the same exact body, and they're going to be drafting fairly similar at the round 1-2 border, where they're going to be kind of competing for the same type of names here.
All right, now let's move on to round 3. Now, this is, like you said, there's a lot of depth in this class. So there's a decent amount of guys who can still be early contributors, not the same as in round 2, where you could probably expect them to play a really significant role. These are probably going to be more rotational guys. But who do you think could make the biggest impact of that group? And again, as a great fit for what New England needs right now.
I want to make the case for Johnny Wilson as the third round pick. I have no idea where he's going to go. I don't know if some teams think he's actually a tight end. I've seen that kind of flirted out there on Twitter. When I watched him, I was expecting, just because everyone's just kind of crapping on him, I was expecting someone to be super slow and just like has no nuance in the routes. And yeah, he has some bad drops. Like he could be better in the contested situations. But man, 6'7" with the 4.53 40, 81st percentile broad jump, 82nd percentile short shuttle. Most players that have that type of athletic traits at that size, they're all in the NBA. They're not in the NFL. So I think they're just like this archetype that I'm kind of searching for. If he has to go in the slot, Marquez Colston's a comp. I think that Kenny Golladay on the outside is also a potential comp for him. I just thought he played with more speed down the field and could bend and sink his hips more than I think people are giving him credit for. I just didn't see very many tight ends win at X receiver 35 yards down the field. So I think it's kind of only pretty much insulting to think that Johnny Wilson should transfer over to tight end. We don't know how he would block in line. There also are cut-ups of Johnny Wilson blocking as a receiver and absolutely annihilating corners who have like 40, 50 pounds lighter than Johnny Wilson. So I think he would be able to be the X receiver. You're taking a dart. This is the third round. These guys bust all the time at receiver or any other position you're talking about. But this athletic traits is just super hard to find. He actually fits the role that the Patriots need, where he doesn't have to be 8-10 targets per game. Let him develop 5 targets per game. Obviously, the Patriots are going to be super slow pace, win with defense. So I think that throw up a couple passes and maybe he can become this dig route guy because he can sink his hips, and hopefully his hands just develop in the meantime.
Johnny Wilson is one of the weirdest evaluations because he doesn't match any of the things that you would just expect when you watch him. Like you said, where you think he's just going to be this big, you think he's going to be like Keon Coleman, but he's absolutely not. He's way more fluid than you expect. My first exposure was at the Senior Bowl, and I'm hearing people make the tight end comps of like, oh, he's so slow and like all this. I'm like, I don't see that. Like, especially as a route runner, that's, I think, what elevates, like, is he super fast? No. But he does such a good job making guys uncomfortable because he gets on your toes quickly. He attacks leverage, and he knows how to manipulate guys. So I agree. I think he'd be a really interesting pick, especially in round 3. If you can get a good X in the 3rd round, you don't have to be a superstar. I think you at least have enough guys who fill the spots you need, and then you can really add talent. Speaking of which, a popular name in the chat right now is Malachi Corley. So let's say the Patriots did manage to get their X receiver. All right. So now you have all the prototypes taken care of. And now you just want to add talent. How would you feel about adding him again, especially considering Demario Douglas's health is a little bit up in the air? Right. And this is a guy who could probably take more of those hits if you're talking about like drag routes and really be more physical and take those big hits.
Definitely. He's a different body type than Pop Douglas. Theoretically plays the same role. So if you're willing to take Pop Douglas off the field, then yeah, he can be someone that could slide into the slot receiver role. My problems with Malachi Corley is his average air yards per catch, how far down the field he was on his actual catches, 3.8 yards. I mean, that's just like Mickey Mouse routes. And he's really good at them. So the comps I had, like Jarvis Landry, Laviska Shenault kind of transitioned into this role. Amari Rodgers, the Packers tried this, and he's basically out of the league. So there's some downside comps with him. People want to call him Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, like you said, at Z can run dig routes and get open on those type of things and develop yards after the catch, 15 plus yards down the field. There's just no evidence that Malachi Corley can do that. And he goes to a smaller school, was not able to transfer over to one of the Power 5 programs. So that gives me a little bit of concern here. So I think that I would want the Patriots just to take another dart throw on the offensive line, like any of them, a backup tackle, a depth at guard, something like that over Malachi Corley. I think he like offers too much of the same type of thing that Pop Douglas or Juju Smith-Schuster if he can get healthy.
I agree. All right, let's move on to round 4. Now, actually, is Malachi a guy that you would think would go round 3 or 4? And then after that, who do you like in that range for New England?
I have Malachi Corley as my personal wide receiver 18 in the class, third round grade. I think that he's probably going to go in the second round, just looking at like consensus rankings, which would be too early for me just because he's a manufactured touch guy. And there's like someone like Malik Washington, also kind of a manufactured touch slot receiver. You can get these type of guys all the time in round 3, round 4, sometimes even later than that. So it would be a little bit too early for me. Some other X receivers kind of in that range. I think Javon Baker out of UCF, I think he's probably going to be a round 3 guy, but let's say he falls a little bit or he is the Patriots pick at the top of the 3rd round. There's a little bit Michael Gallup to his game. Romeo Doubs is another option there where I can see the athletic traits. He has made some really big plays. He runs all of the routes out there, but there's also just he has some of the most hilarious fumbles that you'll ever see where he catches the ball, gets hit, the ball just pops like 20 yards in the air, and then somebody else gets him. There's just these mistakes that is just like, what is going on here? He went from Alabama to UCF, but he does play X receiver, runs all of the routes that the Patriots need. So I think he would be an option. Jermaine Burton, I don't know where he's going to go. He's not necessarily an X receiver, but he's an outside deep threat that the Patriots need. He at least can take the top off. He had like a 20 ADOT, average depth of target down the field. And he's more physical. Like he's just got like a bigger build. He's not super wiry like Tyquan Thornton. And there were some times at Alabama where Jermaine Burton was somebody that they had to like bounce off a safety and then get some yards after contact, where I can see him being in the mix. And then really far down, guys like Devontae Walker, I don't think you want that. Brendan Rice is an X receiver. He went to USC, so I watched a bunch of him. He's kind of like more Josh Palmer, Gabe Davis, Isaiah Hodgins are some of the names. I didn't think that he was super elusive. I don't think his ball tracking was all that good, but he is a big receiver. Obviously, his dad was Jerry Rice. 4.51 40 at least was a little bit faster than I thought. So those would be kind of the names in that range. But really, Johnny Wilson led the class in yards per game as an isolated wide receiver. That should mean something at that size. 52 yards per game as the isolated wide receiver, number 1 in the class. So I think that's kind of the name in the top of the 3rd round that I'm kind of pulling for.
We're pounding the table for Johnny Wilson. I like it.
What can go wrong?
Going back to Javon Baker, going in, I was expecting a lot. Like he's got a lot of hype. And then, again, when you see the highlights, it's warranted because the catch is outside the frame. Like he's clearly got strong hands. It was the drops, though, and the failure to finish through contact that really surprised me. There was one game where it happened like 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, wait, this is not the guy I thought I was going to see. For me, it kind of bumped him to, like you said, the 4th round kind of range where I was like, you need to teach this guy how to catch, I think. Naturally he just has good hands, but I don't think he knows, like he's not throwing up the diamond. He's like closing in on the ball, and that just leaves a lot of room for error there. Brendan Rice, one thing I like about his game is that he gets a lot of flags. We saw it at the Senior Bowl where people were like, oh, he can't get separation. I'm like, do you see what's happening? He's getting dogged and still managing to win at the top, which I like. And it translated when I watched the film because he's drawing like 1 or 2 flags a game because he's so physical. I think he's just sudden enough where guys kind of get overwhelmed trying to cover him. So, yeah, there's some mocks where I took him in like the 3rd round. Then I started to think like, nah, it's a little bit rich. You can get better value at other positions. But if he's in the 4th round and they still really need that actual prototypical X, say they got like Leggett or somebody like that, I really like him in that range. We're going to close out with your sleepers. Who are some guys that not enough people are talking about that you think would be good fits for New England?
So I think Jermaine Burton and Johnny Wilson are like my guys, like day 2 guys. I really that can go crazy here. I wanted Taj Washington out of USC, the slot receiver, to be a guy, because whenever I watch him on tape, he was creating a lot of separation. But then you look into his overall profile, 23 years old. He's super tiny, 185 pounds, and then he ran 4.58. If he did not run 4.58, I would have a third round grade on him. But I think that he's going to get pushed down to round 4. I think that there's a little bit of Pop Douglas to the Taj Washington profile. And then I haven't gone beyond that. Once I got to Jamari Thrash and Taj Washington, Brendan Rice, I was like, okay, I found the range where I don't see an obvious, this is going to be a starter anymore. So I think round 4, round 5, maybe Josh and I kind of circle back to that range. But the good news for Patriots, I think that round 3 is kind of the sweet spot that I would like for them to go, unless they trade down from 3. I think that the round 2 stuff, you're getting into a little bit of the overlap that I'd be a little bit concerned with, and that's still going to be a good spot to get tackle. So I think if it goes Drake May, a tackle, and then an X receiver in round 3, a dart throw there, I don't think that would be the worst case scenario. Then you can always keep looking for that prototypical size in the future.
Keep those Drake May hopes alive. Hayden, yes. Thank you so much for your time, buddy. This was a blast. We got to have you on again. But for right now, please let the people know where they can find you and what fantastic stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we can look forward to.
So on Twitter, Hayden Winks, and then on YouTube, we're on the Underdog NFL Draft account, Underdog Fantasy. So we'll be doing some draft coverage, and we'll flip over to fantasy football coverage right after the draft concludes. So we're probably going to do 20, 15-minute breakdowns on all these top wide receivers. We're churning through them still. So I guarantee you, whoever the Patriots end up drafting, we will have a 15-minute breakdown on them on draft night.
You guys have been a go-to resource for me. I really appreciate the work and appreciate you stopping by, brother. And I appreciate you all for watching as always. But for now, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will